Oh, son of a bitch. Good way to start the episode. I wrote down the meeting information and then I deleted it before I copied and pasted it like a genius. So let me go ahead and get this information in the chat again real quick. What's up, fellas? Sorry for the rough start there. Today I am going to be talking about the Antikythera Mechanism. I realized pretty quickly that this was going to need to be a multi-episode little mini-series talking about out-of-place artifacts. In fact, kind of my whole channel is talking about out-of-place artifacts in a way. Password, get this in the chat. So anyone who would like to join via Zoom and share their thoughts on any of this, or even if you have thoughts on an unrelated matter, feel free to share those as well, as long as it's, you know, history related in some way. I guess I have to be in actual YouTube to pin that comment. Hopefully, though, you know, if anybody needs access, let me know in the chat, and I can pin that or repost it. Okay, let me mute this. Gonna have a little background video playing. It's about the Antikythera Mechanism. Going to minimize that. There we got the chat set up, so now I can see anyone who chats me while I talk about the Antikythera Mechanism. So an OOPArt, real quick, an OOPArt is an out-of-place artifact. That is anything that doesn't fit within the mainstream narrative of history. These are actually found pretty often. You don't hear about them all of the time because the standard response for an OOPArt, for an out-of-place artifact, is to simply dismiss it. When an archaeologist finds something that they think shouldn't be there, their conclusion is generally, well, this shouldn't be here, so I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to dismiss it. Someone buried this here, so it's out of place, or it's just, you know, contamination from something modern. Whatever, you know, the dismissal that they come up with in their head that is the standard response, is to simply dismiss an out-of-place artifact. And the Antikythera Mechanism is a fantastic example of that. And I was actually rather disappointed in the conclusion that was drawn by the Y-Files on the Antikythera Mechanism, because they just did an episode this very week. Right after I announced that I'd be doing an episode on this, they came out with an episode on out-of-place artifacts, and they also talked about the Antikythera Mechanism. And his conclusion was kind of that scientists, that this had been written about in Greek texts, and so scientists actually knew about this, and it wasn't actually surprising, and that there were other things like this out there, and it's not actually out of place. And in a way, I do agree with this. This was written about in Greek texts, and so were many other objects, like fully autonomous robots, you know, talking heads. So, but the response from archaeologists was not to read these accounts of these machines and of these computers and conclude that they existed. The response from archaeologists was to dismiss all of this because this was asynchronous. This did not fit into their, you know, Bronze Age civilization having fully autonomized robots. That was not, and computers. That was certainly anachronous and not a part of the mainstream narrative. And even when the Antikythera Mechanism was found, And if you're paying attention to what's going on the screen here, there's lots of math. I just kind of, in fact, before I continue talking about the Antikythera mechanism, let me talk about a little bit about the video going on in the background, which I meant to do initially. This is ClickSpring. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in the Antikythera mechanism to check out ClickSpring. Have I accidentally paused this? No. Okay. He is one of many people who is recreating the Antikythera mechanism, although I would argue he is the only person to do so completely. And this is kind of what I was talking about a second ago, is that when this was first found, it was still being dismissed. This was found, I believe, in the 90s, 1990, actually, I believe was the year it was found. And they realized it was some type of mechanical gear device, which already was somewhat asynchronous, was already somewhat out of place for the time, because they did have writings of these things, but they weren't really sure how much they actually existed in reality. And they certainly weren't imagining anything to this level of complexity actually existing. But they didn't realize the level of complexity, the level of actual computer that was created over 2,000 years ago. The Antikythera mechanism is believed to be 2,200 years old. And so even after this device was discovered, it was dismissed for about 20 years before it was finally X-rayed, and they realized that it was far more complex than initially thought. But even after those initial X-rays, it was still, not given anywhere near the credit that it truly deserved. And the other recreations of this mechanism, there have been over a dozen recreations of the Antikythera mechanism, but they're in varying degrees of simplicity. Not a single one comes anywhere close to this level of complexity that ClickSpring here is creating. And I believe he's really gone much further in depth with this project than anyone else has. And I believe he's at the forefront of research on this mechanism. And he is, if you can see here, he's using, these are not modern tools he's using. He's drilling this with a hand drill, a bow operated hand drill. And this is one playlist. In fact, I'll zoom out a little bit here. This is machining the Antikythera mechanism. He also has another playlist dedicated just to making the tools of the Antikythera mechanism. So he isn't using modern tools to create this. He actually went, all the way to scratch and recreated ancient, the types of tools they would have had in ancient times, the types of tools they would have been able to create 2,200 years ago. And he is using some modern machinery. If you watch his tool playlist, he explains. He goes through the process of making the tools, but then he doesn't necessarily go through the process of recreating every duplicate of every tool using the old methods. But he does demonstrate all of them can be created using the old methods, and then saves some time duplicating those tools with modern methods. I hope that makes sense. So, as I was saying, the standard response to OOPArts, to out-of-place artifacts, is to dismiss them, and the Antikythera mechanism has very largely been dismissed by historians even after its discovery, and even after being X-rayed and, having complex scans done of it. It's still, I talk to people, I bring this, how often do you talk about the Roman Empire? Well, I actually talk about this stuff really quite often. It's kind of my passion, so I talk about it a lot. And when I bring up the Antikythera mechanism, I'm quite glad to see that people usually know what I'm talking about. You mentioned the ancient computer found off the coast of Greece, and people generally know what I'm talking about, but they also generally dismiss it. They go, oh, it's not really a computer. It really wasn't all that complex. It was basically a fancy sundial. And if you're watching the video behind me, or not behind me, just full screen here, I suppose, you're seeing that there's nothing simple about this. This is a highly complex machine. And the degree of expertise and genius that went into this machine really supports some of my other arguments, such as, I've talked about craniectomies and how I believe that the ancient past had far more knowledge than they're given credit for in all regards. I don't think they were ooga booga simple cavemen. I think that for the last 300,000 years, modern humans have been walking around this earth and they've been just as smart as anyone else. Probably a lot smarter than your average person today, honestly, because as I mentioned in the previous episode, I no longer know how to navigate without a GPS, even though I used to know how to do that. I think that technology is making all of us dumber. And so we're actually probably a lot less intelligent than your average person 2,000 years ago, quite frankly. And so, yeah, I think that ancient people understood medicine. I think they understood science. I think they understood many of the things that we understand today, but don't give them credit for. And I think this device is the perfect example of this, because the level of complexity that goes into this machine, if people were capable of figuring this out 2,200 years ago, I really struggle to think of a whole lot of things that they wouldn't have been capable of figuring out. This is not a simple machine. This is not just a sundial. This is, let me talk about what this is, because I haven't really covered that yet, have I? This machine, this computer, and it absolutely was a computer. Some people, cringe when the word computer is used, but this absolutely was a computer. It was able to track the heavenly bodies, so the sun, the moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, 5 planets, the moon and the sun, and it was able to calculate so precisely their movements that it even predicted lunar and solar eclipses. And this device would have been accurate for several hundred years. There are some limitations to this device because it is mechanical. You see how big these gears are getting, how many teeth they have, but there are limitations when you're dealing with mechanical devices. So it wasn't accurate for all eternity, but it was accurate for several hundred years. You could predict a lunar and solar eclipse out with this device a few hundred years out. That's how good this device was over 2,000 years ago. Just to emphasize how complex of a task that is, these orbits of the planets are not cylindrical. You're dealing with elliptical orbits. So first off, you have to be able to record the movements of all of these heavenly bodies for long enough and accurately enough that you can even build a model of them. And then you have to do the math to figure out the cycles and it's really, really, honestly, even after having all of this stuff spelled out to me, how all of this stuff works. Like, I still struggle to understand it because it's just that complex. So tracking 5 different planets plus the moon plus the sun, all accurately enough that this could predict the positioning to the point of predicting eclipses several hundred years out. It's really hard to overstate just how impressive that is. And if you don't consider that a computer, I really don't know what it would take for you to consider it a computer, because that's clearly computing a whole lot of different things all at once with this machine. So unbelievably impressive. And like I said, I can't think of a whole lot of things that people wouldn't be able to figure out that we have today if they were able to figure out this level of complexity and engineer to this level of precision over 2,000 years ago. Medicine seems, obvious that they would have figured that out. You have the proof I've presented with craniectomies and how thousands of years ago they were performing emergency surgeries to blunt force trauma victims more successfully than we do today. We do craniectomies for blunt force trauma victims today, and they were able to do those with a higher survival rate than we're able to do them today. You have statues in India that seem to depict certain surgeries like appendectomies and other surgeries. You have Chinese medicine, which, again, something that was dismissed for so very long because it just couldn't be that the Chinese understand, medicine in this complex way, because people were these ooga booga cavemen previously who didn't understand anything. This overarching theme of history is, people were stupid before. They didn't know what they were doing. Anything that was invented was just invented by accident. This is even with the even after this has had high-tech scans done, it's had x-rays done, even after we're seeing this level of complexity, even after ClickSpring is demonstrating just how unbelievably complex this machine was, the kind of attitude is still dismissal within, at least to some degree. I'm sure there are plenty of historians and archaeologists who do recognize this for the marvel that it is, but there's also plenty that would still kind of scoff at this and scoff at the idea of a computer and go, oh, it was just a fancy sundial. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about here is that theme of dismissal, that theme of really trying to combat that theme, that people were not simple ooga booga cavemen, that the Antikythera mechanism was not this totally out of place invention. I don't think this was a one of a kind. I don't think this was particularly unique. I think that we have to reevaluate history and look at it through the lens of the ancients being far more advanced than current history is willing to give them credit for. And this is just such a perfect piece of evidence for that, because you actually have the physical, solid evidence with all of these gears and mechanisms. You really can't, even though there are still people denying how incredible it is, you really can't deny how incredible it is. And you combine that with things like the ancient vases, and you're really in need of rewriting all of history. This is a Greek invention, 2,200 years old. As I've talked about, the attitude of the smartest people throughout all of history was an attitude of trying to recover knowledge of the past, to try and recover the expertise of the past. I mentioned that they had, in writing, writings of completely autonomous robots. So talking heads, faces that articulated with mouths and eyes and eyebrows, right? But not only that, they communicated with you. You could sit down and communicate with these things, kind of like you would communicate with the AI of today. And these are dismissed the same way the Antikythera mechanism was initially dismissed until it was discovered, and is still to some degree dismissed. So all of these writings of these fantastic inventions, by the way, these writings are in the same books by the same people. So the same people that were describing the Antikythera mechanism were describing these other inventions. I suspect those inventions are real. I lean towards the idea of, them having these fully autonomous robots thousands of years ago. That's what they wrote about. And we have this physical solid evidence of a highly complex computer that tracks all of the celestial bodies, all of the visible ones at least. And yeah, I apologize, guys. I am extra tired today. I spent the entire day. I grossly misjudged my wardrobe and spent the entire day just trying to stay warm, and used a lot of energy doing so. So I'm a little sleepy, a little low on energy today. I know I had a lot more to talk about with the Antikythera mechanism, and it's escaping me right at the moment just because I'm so tired. So I do apologize for that. I highly recommend everyone check out ClickSpring. Sorry about that. I highly recommend everyone check out ClickSpring and the videos in both of his playlists, the machining the Antikythera mechanism, as well as the tools. It's a few hours long if you watch all of it, but it really is absolutely fascinating. I'm not a stupid guy. I'm pretty smart, and I mean it when I say that even after watching all of it and paying very close attention to it, I struggle to understand it. It is just that complex. It is just that impressive. There's absolutely nothing simple about the Antikythera mechanism. Anyone who dismisses the Antikythera mechanism does not understand. They don't have a good understanding of what it is. Anyone who actually sees what's going on in this thing and tries to dismiss it as anything other than a miracle of engineering is a goober. So I highly recommend you check out his videos because, as you saw, the editing is very great, fantastic editing, but also just the knowledge, the information, the ability to create something so complex using methods so simple, because he uses only methods that would have been found in the ancient world to go all the way through creating the tools needed to make it and then creating the individual pieces needed to make it. And he discusses, because this is his trade, he is an expert in clock making and devices like clocks, which this is, and so he's really able to share his expertise quite eloquently on the matter. I can't come anywhere close to discussing it on the level that he does. So highly recommend you check it out. But as far as the implications of this device, again, if people were creating this, they were creating other things. This device is not a one of a kind. And I think it would be very foolish to think they reached this level of advancement in gears and in astronomy, but they were these simple, primitive people in other areas. No, they understood medicine. They understood philosophy. They understood so much. And so much has been lost. And to explain how so much has been lost a little bit, there's a lot of factors going into this. One, humans are extremely destructive. So is time. Time is also extremely destructive. But we don't have a single written word from the Greeks. Any Greek text that we have today is a later copy, not actually written by a Greek person. So even Rome, which came after Greece, we don't have any records, any first-hand account records for almost the first 1,000 years of Rome. Most of what we know about Rome comes from an author named Livy, and Livy wrote about Rome 600 years. Most of the events he was writing about were 600 years before he started writing about it. And the texts from Livy are far from complete because of the damages of time. So we have these partial texts from Livy that were written 600 years after the events, and those are the best source of information and text we have on Rome, is that. Greece was even before that, right? So even though it's presented as we have this really deep understanding of the Greeks and the Romans and of history in general, we really don't. We have a very flimsy understanding of it, and made even flimsier by the attitudes that I've repeatedly talked about this episode, where they go, hey, the Antikythera Mechanism is written about in text. Well, obviously that didn't exist. That's too advanced, so we're just going to dismiss this. So when they decide to pick and choose what texts to believe, and what even physical evidence, as I've mentioned, even when they find physical evidence that is out of place for what they think they should be finding, it still gets largely dismissed. And the Antikythera Mechanism was largely dismissed for over 20 years, for almost 30 years. And it's still being dismissed today by many people, even though the evidence is out there, even though the hard proof is now fully out there. So yeah, man, I think they were advanced in all kinds of ways. I think that it's an absolute mistake to think that people before us were more primitive than us, that they didn't have things figured out. People were smarter than us because they didn't have the boon of technology to hold them back with. You know, we are definitely getting dumber. The more we rely on technology, the less we rely on ourselves, the less knowledge and capabilities we need to function. It inevitably leads to us being less functional and more stupider, right? So the people in the past were not dumb. They had a very deep understanding of science, of many different branches of science, and the overarching theme of the geniuses of the past was to try and recover the genius of their past, right? So they always viewed the people before them as having knowledge and information that they were trying to recover. And we seem to be trending, while there is some linear progression, I think that we've gone through a few different resets now, and with each reset, while we do regain some knowledge and some capability, we're generally trending lower and lower, and towards more barbarism, if you will. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. I apologize for this episode. I'm I'm very physically drained, and so I wasn't fully here mentally, and sorry for that. But hopefully it was still interesting. And next week I will be coming at you with some more OOPArts. There are some really, really fascinating things out there. Some really, really out of place things. Might even talk about like the Mars nuke theory, stuff like that, which is super, super out of place. But I think the universe is vast, and so are the possibilities. So I will catch you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in. This was Rewriting History with TheGOOB live call-in show, and I will see you next Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If I can actually